Well, after an embarrassment of audio tests, I finally have my good friend Med here to be a proxy for my detractors and allow me to debate them with somebody who I already know agrees with me. So thanks for being here, Med.
Hey, confirmation bias, am I right?
That's right. That's what we're looking for here.
Now, we already talked about this and discovered that our recording was suboptimal.
Yeah, a lot of audio problems. This is surprisingly hard to do.
Yeah, well, we learned a lot.
But now we're here. We're both caffeinated and willing to recapitulate a lot of the points that we spoke about. Well, we already took a rough stab at this.
Yep.
So it's like, let me try to remember
Well,
what we talked
Well,
about.
what was the initial activation of this whole conversation? It was this thought about zone. and
Yeah,
the flow
so
state.
certain debatable points about the zone that we go to when we make art. Do you have to be good or not to experience it? Right? In heavy air quotes, good. Do you need to be good at art in order to get into the zone? Or can it happen anytime? Is it always available at any skill level? Also, what is it? Is it a vain endeavor to try to define what it is?
I was about to say, what would be your thoughts on what the zone or the flow state is? I gave my thoughts.
Yeah.
Kind of like dance and music. When you're really overtaken by music or a song, or you're on the dance floor or something, you're letting that experience inform your actions, as opposed to your consciousness, like saying, oh, I have to put my arm here, I have to be good at doing this move and like the spin or whatever. I don't know, I'm not like a dancer, but there's a certain flow state where you're flowing to the rhythm of the music without yourself getting in the way. Right? And why would yourself get in the way? And that's going to be those intrusive thoughts, as you've discussed before, is, well, I have to do it perfectly. I have to be good at dancing first. I have to, a long checklist of first, before. But my argument was, as it relates to art, you've heard about the flow state. There's books on it. There's a bunch of YouTube videos on it about how after a certain point when you're drawing or sketching, or even right away, you kind of get lost in the drawing. And it feels like it's both playful, but also like dreamlike. And it's a wonderful place to be. It can be very therapeutic and healing place. But so many people are hard on themselves. Like, no, if I'm going to draw something, it's got to be good. I have to know the fundamentals. Otherwise, I'm going to invalidate it all. And so my thought is, well, if you think that you have to be good first to achieve that place in the flow state, in the rhythm of the drawing, getting lost in that joy. I mean, if you look at children drawing, when I see my niece drawing with her crayons, she's not concerned about it being perfect or whatever. She's in the zone. She's having a great time, and she's getting so lost in it. She'll do a drawing here, grab another piece of paper, and then draw that, and then connect the papers, and just like, it's a very exploratory sense of wonder. But I mean, you've talked about it in that it's the separation of your conscious self from your state of being. If you want to just talk about that.
So a bunch of great points that I'll wrap around back to a little bit. But the way that I always think of it as whatever happens in flow, to me, its most foundational defining experience is that you don't know you were in it until you look back.
Exactly.
Right? So it's however long it was, an hour, 20 minutes, you're not aware that it was happening until you sort of snap out of that. And then you look back and go, oh, yeah, that was all just happening. I don't really quite remember that amount of time going by. And I personally, from thinking it through and from personal subjective experience, I interpret that as the self, as we traditionally think of it, wasn't present for that time. And then that asks a lot of questions like, all right, well, what do you mean by self, right? But I'm not going to go too much into detail on that, but that kind of touches on some of the points that you made.
Yeah.
So for the self that I'm thinking of, it's the part of you that regresses as an observer eternally, right? So that part of you that's like self-consciously watching everything that you do, that part's not there. So in flow, you may be making super sophisticated choices. You may be even doing conceptual and analytical decision-making and parsing of information, making artistic choices. A lot of stuff is on the table. Everything's on the table. The trick is that in flow, you just make those choices, right? There's no second hovering self-referential part that is then saying, what does that choice mean to me, to the arc of my practice? Is that the right choice to be making? Would I be making this choice better if I was a better artist? Like, there's
more reference.
Yeah, there's just not that second step. Let's say there's corrective things happening in the flow state, right? You're like, that hand's not quite right. It needs a better shape. You just erase, you change it, and that's it. Like, the character of your experience gets pared down to just that.
Right.
And then I think that those things get linked. And because there's no self-referential part, time sort of just disappears, right? You're just those experiences happening purely moment after moment. The other element that I personally think is associated with it is that it's regenerative. Most people, after they realize, oh, I was in flow, they feel good.
Yeah.
It's a good feeling.
Yeah.
It's not a neutral feeling, which it totally could have been, right? It's totally viable that being in flow would feel utterly neutral, like not interesting, but I think most people find it remarkable and it makes them feel good. It's regenerative.
And to add to that, it's like, well, you hear about all these miraculous, amazing things being done when people are in the flow state, you know, spinning rods with fire on it, or dancing or ice skating, or even Olympic athletes have to be in a certain mental state to be able to pull off what they do. And so the question is, flow state means great work as a result. But does it?
I would say no. I would say that the flow state is available no matter if the work is poor, mediocre, or expert.
Right.
I do think it's fascinating that in that state where you're not self-referential, unbelievably sophisticated things are possible. You can produce expert level work in flow, and that's certainly remarkable, but it's not like required, right? At least I don't see why it would be.
Right.
Because that evaluation step where you're like, oh, this is good, this is bad.
That's the self.
Yeah.
Questioning,
Any moment where you would be making that self-evaluation is sort of synonymous with like not being just the experience of art making, at least for that split second, right? So it'd sort of be a non-flow moment.
And so, as you've also talked about before, even when you're in the flow state, the self does peek in and kind of intrude here and there. And I guess with practice, that just happens less and less. The more you let go of the need for control.
There's definitely the experience of the self sort of peeking in the middle of flow. And ultimately, I don't think that has to break flow, right? Because that in and of itself is also just an experience. I think the problem for a lot of people is that when the self peeks in and it does its self-referential thing, we tend to add like an unnecessary tag to it where we give it extra energy. Yeah, we're like, oh no, that's not good. Or I think a really devious one is, oh no, that means I'm distracted, right? Like I'm not focusing. So
ironically makes you even...
Yeah. So I think as you get more and more used to the whole experience of making art, like what it's like to sit for 4 hours, 5 hours, 8 hours, and you get more and more familiar with the things that come in and out, when the self peeks in and does a little judgmental thing, you get more accustomed to not adding the tag at the end. That gives it extra energy and makes you sort of exaggerate its importance. And then it's easier to just put that little moment of peaking in its proper place as something that you can notice maybe, but you can also safely ignore it. You don't have to let it change the energy of the sitting. Yeah, so I think as time goes on, you get more and more used to avoiding those tags that we tend to add to those little peaks of self.
You know, talking about performance, you were in theater during high school, right? I think one time when you were showing me the ropes of how to like give a presentation and talk, you mentioned that during some performances, it feels like an out-of-body experience, like you're just letting the script roll through. And is that anything akin to flow for you?
Yeah, I would say definitely. I would say that the analogs to sort of the self stepping away are pretty direct. You know, I'm not an actor by trade, so I'd be interested in what people who act would say about this, or what if they feel I'm sort of right here. But in my experience, when you act, right, someone gives you someone else's words that you're supposed to say. But when you're acting well, I feel like you're saying the words, but you also understand why the character is saying those words. You understand their motivations. You sort of project into their feelings. And I think at its most selfless, when you've practiced a lot and you feel connected with the material, you almost really do forget your you.
Right.
And everything feels unified. And people talk about it when they talk about actors, like really high level actors. It's like they are the character, right? And I actually think in some sense you really are, because when you're on stage, and let's say you're doing a scene where the character is supposed to be like totally angry, like as angry as they've ever been in their life. It's like a climax, right? If you're like really into it and you are moving your body in an angry way and screaming in an angry way,
of course,
you feel angry, right? Like all of the signs of anger are present in your sphere of consciousness. You just sort of have the lucky pulled back view of, right, but I'm not really angry. But everything else is in place, right? And again, then, that sort of asks us, like, okay, we're getting into the real like mysticism stuff and things like that, but that also asks us, like, all right, if that can be true on stage, why can't you, when you are angry in your real life, why can't you recognize all of the aspects are there? My body feels tense. My emotions feel elevated. I'm overreacting. I'm speaking loudly and aggressively to someone. Why can't you do the same pullback and just see the components in their places and realize that you're sort of telling yourself a story of your own anger, right? And you're linking all of those things. You're saying, because my face is red, because my voice is elevated, because I have a trickle down my back, I must be angry. It's like, well, you're making that connection in a lot of ways.
Right.
Yeah. And that's pretty outside the realms of art. But
so when it comes to, let's say, separating the self from your drawing experience. Now, when you're studying perspective, shading, values, the physics of the fundamentals, right? You don't really need to be in a flow state or whatever. You're just kind of like studying. You kind of have to be present for it. Now, there are moments in studying where it becomes ooh and aha, and you kind of wake up from it and you realize you just figured some stuff out as you look back. But I find that when I'm drawing and I enter that zone, I can pretty much, it feels great, as you said, but also it lasts about 45 minutes to an hour. And then I kind of just like, wake up from it.
Yeah.
Is that similar for you? Do you go longer than that?
No, I'd say that it's cyclical on similar timescales. I feel there's certain natural durations. I think for the most part, it's almost inevitable that you're going to start self-referencing again, and that your brain needs to like keep pinging you to remember, like, all right, well, we got to go do this thing as well. And I think there's more times where you have something else on the schedule to do than there isn't. So I think it's vital for our brain. Our brain still needs to remind us, like, hey, you're you, and you have, a dog to walk and taxes to do and other things like that. So I think that it's almost inevitable that that's going to happen. Though if you extend these ties again to like wisdom traditions, right? If you look at Zen meditation, if you read the old stories and they talk about enlightened masters, for example, it's remarkable that what they claim about them sounds like flow, basically one-to-one, and they just make the claim that they're always in flow, right? They're doing all the same things. They're just not self-referencing in a painful way. Yeah. So it may be possible for people to extend the length of the flow feeling.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, it'd be kind of nice to be able to just dive into any project, your own or for a client's, and not let that critical self get involved and try to, freak you out and induce paranoia. you know,
Yeah.
because for me, like when that paranoia kicks in, I can't possibly perform my best. Right. And the irony is, like, for some people, including myself, that tension and anxiety might, you know, provoke some ideas that, oh, well, I should be more prepared for this then. I should study more. I have to get better. And it cycles back to our initial part of this conversation where, yeah, there is some truth to, if you dispel that need to be better first, would it then just be easier to get into the flow state? Maybe, but I think if there's a claim that you have to be good first in order to be in the zone, then no, I disagree.
The getting good question in general, I think, is quite nuanced, is quite sophisticated, right? I feel like for most people, it's actually not the most useful thing. I think it depends on your goals, right? I think if you have goals similar to maybe the goals that you and I had early on, where just from our life experience, we felt like I want to be an artist for a job, and
Right.
I want to work in this particular art world that requires an unusually broad skill set, right? It's not even like straight like the concept art world, where it's like you need to be able to represent materials and all sorts of different proportions and anatomies and all sorts of architectural styles. That's not like straight up illustration as we might normally think of it. That really is more about personal style in a lot of situations.
And building things from the ground up.
Yeah. So that particular niche was asking for such a broad base of skill that in that very narrow category, it's like that goal seems to ask you to put your mind to a lot of very objective application. Like, why does the world look the way it does, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But for almost everything else, it's like, I feel like people get really caught up on the idea of getting good, which is just way too broad and subjective a statement to give any strong direction to.
Right.
You know?
We can understand it for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And what didn't you mention before that, like, most art podcasts come back to this whole thing? How do you get good? Yeah,
Every time.
but you can understand their position where, like, if you haven't crested a certain part in your life where you're feeling secure with your work, income, ability to maintain your life, of course, anything you pursue will be linked to that. And it ideally, that stuff doesn't stress you out to a point where it gets in the way of your progress as an artist, whether it's just learning the fundamentals, learning to tell stories, or learning to search inside and find out what you want to say. But it's like, that's an ideal world. Mental health, therapy, that stuff helps.
Yes, like you said, when you're early on, it's very easy. It's low-hanging fruit to convince yourself, like, all that's missing here is that I be good. I just need to work more, right? If there was a straight shot to that, who wouldn't be a professional artist, right? Like the thousands and thousands of people who start attempting it, almost everyone would find very quickly that, okay, you just grind this, and it works. And then you get better and better. And then the improvements would stack and basically no one would stop, right? Instead, almost everybody stops, even though there's tons of resources out there. And people ignore that, but obviously that
you rolled your eyes.
I think it's eye roll worthy, right? I think that we like all hypnotize each other into thinking that that's really all it's about. But the proof is in the pudding. Almost everybody stops, and almost everybody stops because they don't know how to deal with the disappointment of it not being a straight path, and then that becomes self-reflexive suffering at some point. And I think that for the most part, that should indicate to us, like, half this battle is mental. It's about understanding how you react to things. I know a lot of artists, and there's bison on the walls of the caves of Lascaux that look better than the drawings that a lot of people I know do. And I don't think they had pointers and a grinding system and anything. They had a goal. They had content that they really connected with, and they went for it.
Pretty sure they're trained by aliens.
Okay, that's a different discussion that we'll have tomorrow.
True. Speaking of fundamentals and understanding shape design and perspective, one important thing to point out is tangents, because that book is making a tangent with the edge of the couch, and that's really upsetting me. Could you push it? Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Oh, that's too much.
no, but now it's making double tangents with the table.
Oh. Oh, because of the corners of the book.
Yeah.
You know, if you put Elise's book. Yeah, okay. That's, we don't want it. Okay, good. Not too centered. It's a little better.
Let's discuss tangencies for 2 hours.
We can go off on a tangent. Where's the camera?
I'm sure everybody really appreciated that. Before we neurotically adjusted the books,
yes.
What were we talking about? I already forgot. Well, since we forgot what we were talking about, let me ask you some questions.
Yep.
You're working on a game right now.
A video game.
Yeah. So whatever the game is, I just want to know, like, you've always felt it's important to sort of do your own thing. That's something that I've always got from you. Like, you also needed to be able to grapple with things the way you wanted.
Yeah.
You know, you've always liked, you'll do one process for a while in creating an idea, and then you've always seemed to need the freedom to be like, all right, that process was fine, but now I need something new. Now I've got to kind of like flip it completely and work backwards, middle out, like all sorts of crazy stuff. I want to know, do you feel like taking on this bigger, also group project, do you feel like that's pleasing that part of your mind and feeling like you have control?
I think so, because I mean, it stems from like when I was working in studios, and I think it's probably more of a disempowerment thing from my end, in that working for someone else's idea felt like I was putting off my own thoughts and invalidating all the things I wanted to do. Not that it came from external sources, but rather I wanted to breathe and I couldn't breathe. And so I just had to do things on my own. It's definitely a different process. It's one thing to just open up a canvas and do a speed painting or a photo bash or a portrait sketch. But now with context and constraints, we always knew that putting context can kind of force creativity. I think if I do the same thing over and over again in terms of process, which is like, okay, get reference picture of this, do a sketch of it, color it, light it. Ugh. Boring. Yeah. I need that. I need some kind of new frontier. Like, okay, I'll do it again, but I want context. Okay, well, who is the character? What can I do? What other lighting? I think it's because I just get so quickly jaded and I want to move on to something else that gives me, I don't know. However, now that you mention it, I wonder, you know, is that my own self getting in the way of the flow? Right, because those monks doing those what is it called?
Mandalas.
Mandalas, yeah. They're not doing it to have novelty or trying to come up with a process for a better design. It's just like they're getting in the zone. All it is placing parts of the piece as a whole and then destroying it.
Yeah.
You know, there's probably something to that I could probably learn from.
I think that has the same flavor as some of the discussions that we've had with people who are more starting out on the creative journey. The idea that even in the beginning and in the middle, you kind of have to be accepting that you don't know what's going to come of your final product. You know, you have to a certain point, you just have to accept that maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. And you have to disconnect your own personal self-esteem from what
it's so hard.
It's very hard. It's a constant struggle, but it's so, in my opinion, it's super vital and makes the work better to not be bound up with it as much, which is, it's a tightrope walk because we talk about this all the time too, but making art feels incredible and can give you like true highs in a lot of cases, right? Like when a piece is going well, for me, you know, I feel great. You know, I often feel there's very few things that get me as excited. It makes my whole day feel great. Like I'll sort of walk around happy. I'll be nicer to people, you know, and because it's so strong and it affects you so strongly, it's really easy to then tie it up with your personal selfhood, right? That tendency to tie it into your personal selfhood because it feels great is the same part of you that makes the mistake of making you feel like shit when it goes wrong, right?
Which is if you're disconnecting yourself from it, which is what the flow state does. It's not about you. Whether it ends up being great or absolutely terrible is not part of the equation, right? And ideally, we're all there all the time.
Ideally.
You know, like granted, like, okay, yeah, we go back to the argument about, well, you need training first, but that's not what we're talking about. For me, even watching you, like you're saying that when you're doing a good drawing, it feels good and it's going right. It's about you and you attach this positive idea to it and you feel good. But at the same time, if you come from a place in your life, from a sense of low self-worth, low self-esteem, nobody in your life ever said good job or keep going, it's very hard to look at your work and feel good about it. Even if it's really good, even if it's getting lots of likes, as I know. And so I think if you're in that position, you have to do the inner work, the journaling, the understanding why you feel the way you feel, and try to overcome and transcend that need for the work to be good in order for you to feel good. You know, and you know, as you mentioned, when you're in the zone, and I've seen you in the zone before with your art, but even when we were recording the coffee stuff, like I was pulling coffee in the espresso machine, and like it's like an hour went by like that, and you were just like in the zone, setting up the light, like, okay, I'm gonna do this and that, and suddenly we have this great footage of making coffee.
But it's easy there because we don't identify with, oh, we're people who shoot coffee.
Exactly.
I think it's a very important point that the whole variety of experience is available in the art practice, right? So there's going to be some people that while you're doing a piece, you feel horrible the whole time, but the satisfaction of the piece being done will get you through it. There's some artists who do that. I used to get my satisfaction from, was it fun while I was doing it? Now I've sort of I'm trying to internalize my goals a bit more. So now I consider my practice to have been run quite successfully if no matter whether it went good or bad, I managed my reactions in a way that I want, you know? So
makes sense.
Say a piece is going horribly, right? Let's say it's horrible the whole time. I failed at the beginning to set it up right. I was grinding through and disappointed with the process, and the end result is disappointing, mediocre. And when I post it, it doesn't get a good reaction, right? So it's subjectively a failure, and it's out in the world a failure. I will still consider it a success if, as I was going through the whole process, I noticed all of the feelings that were coming up, and I said, that doesn't matter. You know, I decide that I feel peaceful about this, right? The artwork doesn't decide that I feel peaceful. The reactions of others don't decide that I feel peaceful. It's very important to me in life that I work towards, my peace comes from within, not from without. And as far as I understand it, the operational part of practicing that is to insist on it. It's not going to come from anywhere else. At a certain point, you have to choose. You must insist, like, that's the way I want to live my life. And God damn it, I'm going to do it. Even through that mire of disappointment, it's a success.
That's a really interesting way to frame it. In a way, it's like you can categorize certain actions into groups. So drawing, let's say in this case, you might be overthinking, overanalyzing, wanting to be in control, wanting it to be good, wanting the good reactions, wanting to avoid the bad reactions, everything you just said. And then you have actions that you do throughout the day that you're not doing that for, like going for a walk. You know, it's not like before you go outside, you tie your shoes. Like, I have to make sure that the shoe is tied perfectly, and I have to make sure I put my left foot perfectly in front of the right foot, and I have to make sure that if anyone sees me, I'm doing the perfect. Like, it's just something you happen to do.
Yeah,
you're not evaluating it. You're not trying to be in control of it. It's just subconscious.
Yeah,
right. If you can somehow, because even afterward, you're not like, did I do a good walk or a good shower? Right? You know, if you can get your art and your other actions, your creativity also in that category as just something you happen to do without that extremely critical evaluation, I think that's what you're kind of poking at. Now, it's okay to evaluate your work. Be like, okay, well, the lighting is off here. I'll go study lighting for a little bit and figure that out. But it's, I think, unnecessary to be harmfully critical about your work or other people's work. It doesn't really get you anywhere. You might say that, yeah, it does. The boot camp style works if you grind it out and do all the things and be angry and,
Yeah, it works while you're young.
Sure,
maybe.
yeah.
I think we've all. I feel like we were okay with it when we were young, but dude, almost every artist that I know, they sort of go through a process. They go through an arc where that works for a while, and then they get a little older.
Yeah,
energy goes down. You stop being okay with feeling like crap all the time.
Oh, it gets in your way.
Yeah. When you're young, you have like all this. You just have youthful energy and youthful anger to deal with that. But as you get older, you don't want all that negative emotion all the time.
Right.
You sort of see it for what it is, and you need to find another way. You need to find something else, a different mindset, different way of being to get you through it. And I think that's a big part of what makes the art journey so challenging, because it occurs on a timeline so ridiculously long that you do need to manage almost this lifelong arc of energy management. That's maybe not the case for skills that can be gained on a shorter timeline, And unfortunately, the skill level that we're used to in the world now is super high because, the high end of the skill level is basically defined by freaks. It's defined by freaks, I feel like. Just people who, by temperament and the kind of person they are, there's the occasional freak out there who is just has bottomless energy for self-loathing or whatever, and is also a good practicer and spends a lot of time doing it.
Michael Jordan.
Yeah, freaks. Those are freaks, and they define
Not
the skill.
that it's a bad thing.
No, we all love looking at their work.
Well, the thing is, like, you have to be willing to be okay with the fact that you're not that.
Mm-hmm.
In some ways, the stuff we do is a competition. In some ways, it's not.
Yeah.
Ways that it's a competition: getting a job, getting likes and follows on social media, which could lead to a job. Really, the social conversation kind of implies competition. But then the ways it's not a competition is kind of what we were talking about throughout this whole podcast. It's finding ways to be aware of what's happening so that you are relinquishing that need for it to be the perfect compensation for you into the social conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What a tightrope walk.
Yeah.
Man, it's so difficult. And, and when I look at your journey, which I've been lucky enough to be close to for a long time. Way too close. Uncomfortably close. Yeah. Closer than this, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Just right up on it. Anyway, I feel like it's really difficult to explain to someone who's starting out just how much of a psychological tightrope walk it is. Almost every super advanced artist that I know are have at some point needed to become amateur philosophers in order to manage their own emotions, manage their own expectations. There's very few I can think of who are just what? I practiced and I got good and everything was fine. I can't think of one person who did that.
I feel like there's illusions of that. And it seems like they might be riding a wave right now or at some point, and eventually the wave crashes and there's sort of a crisis, or they're just fine and they don't need to think, and they're just in the play. Acting out the actions and drawing and doing the layer color modes, etc. Some people are in it, but we don't know everyone's behind the scenes.
Yeah. I think my presumption is that most people's behind the scenes are more sophisticated than the front they put forward,
which is unfortunate because, especially for upcoming artists, especially for myself, learn in the learning phase. Not that I'm done learning; we're always students. We would elevate other heroes and artists as these idols. Yeah. For me, Craig Mullins, Ian McCaig, J. Scott Campbell,
same.
Joe Mad. So, nowadays, you hear the memes about, Kim Jong-il and Ranjia being these gods, and they're pretty funny, the memes. And from the outside, yeah, like Kim Jong-il, obviously incredible feats that he's pulling off.
Mm-hmm.
But like what people are not seeing is like the decades of learning all that stuff and what pushed him into a necessity to be able to draw what he does without needing immediate reference and all this. So even with Rangia, like he's an amazing painter. And you look at his images and it feels like an illusion of reality with the twist of fantasy and metallic stuff and sci-fi things. And so it's very tempting, and I understand why people kind of worship that, especially if you don't know how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
It can be a detriment to your perception, because the more you worship something, the more you put it on the pedestal. The more it's on the pedestal, the more out of reach it is for you, and the worse you feel about yourself.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I was getting to.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. It feels like this is something I've thought about lately. When you see someone who's on that high a level, Kim Jong-il, Ruanjia, it's not just a high level, it's also a very specific level. You can appreciate it, but to the desire to emulate, to think like, I must be able to do that.
Right.
Now I'm seeing that more as backwards thinking, because that thing they're doing is so specific that like, why would that be you?
Right.
You know, like you're not them. You have totally different life. You have totally different conditioning factors. Everything surrounding you is utterly different. So it's like an almost insane expectation. To do that, you need to be them in some capacity, you know? Yeah. So don't get caught up. Like that's, your whole life would need to be different. Like you need to find what your conditioning factors, right? What will those result in?
Right.
And you want to investigate that for yourself, and you find your own level of refinement.
Right.
Right.
When you say don't do that, I think what you mean, just to clarify, isn't that, oh, no, don't learn perspective the way Kim Jong-il did.
Indeed.
Yes. Don't learn how to paint like it. What you mean is don't try to be them. Right? Because if you take Rohan Jia, Kim Jong-il, Craig Mullins, and Jamie Jones, put them in the same room, and you say, all right, Craig Mullins, do what Kim Jong-il does. He couldn't do it. All right, Kim Jong-il, do what Craig Mullins does. He might be able to like kind of finagle it, but each person has their own idiosyncratic mastery.
Yep. Great way to put it.
Even Rohan Jia, like, as amazing as a painter as he is, like it's not his, I guess, mastery to do what Kim Jong-il does. Yeah. Right. So when we're looking at all of them from the position of student, of wishing we were also these elevated beings, from the position of the student, it can be really confusing. Like, okay, I have to be able to do this, and that. And if I'm not that, well, I'm obviously worthless. I must be angry at my art. Right.
Yeah, I love the way you put it. Idiosyncratic mastery. Yeah. That's really it. It's
I'm so good at words.
You are.
I'm not as good as you, though.
I love that because that really captures it. I think it's like at the beginning of the journey, you tend to think there's one kind of mastery. And yes, as you go on, you realize every master is sort of their own kind of master. They've sort of found their own particular mix of things. And it's like, dude, rest assured, there are art masters who, for their thing, their particular idiosyncratic mastery, they didn't need perspective, right?
Oh, yeah,
They nailed it with flat art, and their particular mix, they pushed the refinement, and perspective wasn't really a part of it.
Yeah.
You know?
You look at Gustav Klimt, his paintings aren't about depth and perspective and mountains in the distance. It's like there's something else happening. That's his mastery. And I'm sure there are groups of people who would say, no, that's trash art. Only Rohan Jia is good, you know, and
more power to him.
Yeah, fine, fair enough. But that just goes back to worshiping idols and diminishing other idols. And it's like, if you're in that own little bubble, try to find a way out to look at the world differently, you know?
Yeah.
Because it's not good. I was in that bubble for a long time. Well, I remember when I was, before I went to Art Center, I was here in Columbus at CCAD. And I remember like when I'd hang out with my, art friends, my thing was like, oh, don't you guys all want to be masters like Craig Mullins?
Mm-hmm.
And my assumption was that everybody would see his work and say, yeah, that's, oh my God. And then when they saw it, they'd be like, yeah, that's not what I want to do. And I'd be like, what do you mean? What are you doing here at art school if you don't want to be Craig Mullins? you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so I was so in my own chamber, right? That it was just an amateur thing. Yeah. But now that I've like explored outward, you don't even need to say that there's one kind of thing. Ideally, you're just learning, you're just putting in the mileage and trying to find like that inner peace you're talking about, the flow state. Whatever happens, that is you, and then you die. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Oh, that's the best part.
Oh
the
yeah.
dying. That's really it. Yeah.
That's it.
Hey, you ever wonder, I talked about this in a video relatively recently, but you ever wonder what your last drawing will be?
Oh.
Have you ever thought about that before?
I hope it's not that sketchbook over there. No, I've never wondered. Actually, no, I've thought about like if something were to happen to me now, oh, that last PSD was it. It wasn't even a real drawing. I mean, it was a real drawing. It just wasn't a physical thing. There was something I wanted to talk about. It was just like floating in my mind. I had a comment before because we were talking about like mastery and people upholding these, I'd say, delusional ideals of how the world should be and how much like how I thought everyone had to be like Craig Mullins to be a master. I made a video about, is it okay to use reference for your art? Right? Most people agreed. It's like you have to experience something in the world and interpret it, even if your interpretation changes it or you mix things and it becomes something completely unrecognizable to something. But you have to start with reference somehow, right? And there were mostly people saying, yeah, of course. But a lot of people were saying, oh my God, I wish I saw this sooner because I always felt ashamed of looking at something and then using that to inform my expression. And then there was this one person who said, using reference is definitely cheating, and that it's like you're going to a test and you have the answers with you and you're just copying, which is, as you know, is extremely absurd.
There's a lot of weird assumptions in that statement.
Which is like, first of all, you're assuming that everyone's playing your little game. You're playing this game of you're on stage performing in front of some kind of judge. To which I said, like, you know, if you're entering a competition and this competition, you have an easel and the competition is, okay, just do whatever you can without reference. If you use reference in that context, that's cheating because they've set the rules. Yeah. What they're trying to do is take that idea and then scale it up to everyone must play this way. No, dude, you're so wrong. So wrong. You can play that game, but to say that, oh, well, you're looking at a pot of flowers and painting it, cheating. You didn't even make it up. You have to make it up from the ground up. Otherwise, it doesn't count. Like, who are you, you know?
I can't even fathom what it would take to make you. I can't take that argument seriously at all. Like, how would the viewer even know? Like, it sounds like you're hinging everything on just constantly adding to everything you post. Like, oh, I did this from imagination. It's like, dude, who cares?
No one cares except the people in that bubble.
Yeah, it seems horribly caught up with just cultural trappings.
Which is, going back to the original theme, that's the ego or the self imposing some kind of, let's say, no, there's no fun allowed here. You have to prove yourself on the stage. Yeah. And you better do it without reference or whatever, rules. I mean, competitions like that are fine. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, it was that you had to do it within 20 minutes. And if you go over and you're still drawing while they say stop, you're disqualified. Right. So, but at the same time, like, if you're at home and you're beating yourself up because you think I should have been able to draw this engine of a car without looking at anything. Yeah. Calm down.
Yeah, I think that's calm down. It sounds like you need to calm down a little. Even the wildest, strangest, most alien designs are when you're actually holding like a bug or something like that. Those things are so beyond trippy that it feels like you're closing yourself off to a lot of possibilities, you know? Anyway, final point on that, use feel free to use reference
Yes.
if you're into it. Yeah. Even though I draw from imagination a lot, but I'll defend using reference
absolutely.
to the bones.
Okay,
Absolutely. Yeah, it's absolutely valid.
I think that one interpretation, it seems like we're setting rules right now, like in that we're trying to define how to play the game. But we're saying, no, there are no rules in the game. Don't even listen to what we're saying. Make up your own way of going about it. Let that become the idiosyncratic mastery for you. But don't impose that on other people.
Yeah.
Don't say that this is how it must be done.
I'm pretty fuzzy and airy, and there's no rules, and I do really believe that. But if you're in a class with me and I'm teaching you, I'm sort of in a different mode where I'm trying to teach you art rules and things like that, compositional rules, shape rules, design rules, but that's just a different mode, right? And if a student were ever to try to break the fourth wall and be like, is all of this like real? Is this really how it works? I'd of course be like, no, this is all just, it's an academic viewpoint that is useful, but break the rules, I think it's, you don't need to operate within any like concrete realm of certainty about how those things work. And I think one of the best things a lot of students can do is, if you have a teacher, when they tell you like, this is how you do this, right? This is how you render light. This is how you compose something, or avoid this, avoid that, right? Every time they say, avoid this, don't do it this way, trust them, be like, all right, I believe you, and then go home and then do exactly what they told you not to do until you find out how to make it look good. And then don't tell them you did that. And I think that because almost every rule I've ever put earnest effort into breaking, it works. You can find a way to make it work. And I think that education for a student is invaluable. I feel like
don't ever use black paint.
Or don't smudge, right? There's a lot of academic instruction that's like, you hatch everything to make it look good. I bought that bullshit forever. When I went back to smudging, I was like, oh, now I actually feel like I'm drawing my stuff. You just, everything your teachers say, trust them. They're trying to teach you something within a mode. But I think it's super valuable to go do the opposite, prove to yourself that that's not a concrete thing, and integrate that at your leisure,
Yes, totally. Yeah, I mean, you're still teaching at Art Center, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And you're teaching dramatic narrative,
Mm-hmm.
right? And even with storytelling, there are some rules or things that you can control, but you don't have to follow them for all storytelling. Like that gets really cookie cutter. And,
almost all good stories, even if they almost perfectly stick to classic structure, there's like at least one or two spots where they do things a little out of order.
Right.
The rules were meant to be broken. Some people also they then put a rule on that where they're like, oh, you have to know the rules to break them. And they look at masters who, let's say like a Klimt, right? Like we were talking about him. His more mature work, where he really started doing some new and wild things, some people would look at that and interpret it as, okay, but he was classically trained. And Klimt's early paintings look really classical.
Therefore, he's allowed to.
Right.
Quote,
but it's like, you're making assumptions again. It's like you're trying things to learn what you do and do not want to do. You're not trying them to gain permission to do other things.
Right. You can get only so far without trying to understand things like perspective, or carpentry or gardening. You need to know how certain things are laid out. But even with architecture, you have to understand that there's always building blocks, and you can rearrange them, and you can say, okay, well, I don't want to use those building blocks. I just want to use, two-dimensional points in space to define what I want to say. Going back to art, I've even said that, like, you should learn the rules before you break them. When I was teaching at Art Center, because I was talking about shape design and all this stuff, but I would say that to people who were missing the ability to communicate, let's say, good shape design subjectively. But then there were some students who never learned the rules or the foundations and were doing amazing things anyway with shapes, right? So I don't know, like there's more ways to climb your own mountain of idiosyncratic mastery than just the way that people are presenting to you.
Yeah.
Do you think we're pretentious?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. All right.
But that raises an interesting question. It's like,
Because someone's in kind of pretentious assholes thinking that they can define art, but we don't have bad intent.
no, I I think we've made pretty clear, like, I feel very open to the idea that there really is no structure to art. Anything's possible, right? And I've seen unbelievably moving artwork that, as far as I can tell, I can't break it down. Like, there is no, my design knowledge, right? Look, shapes and unequal proportions and color harmonies. It's like, there's masterpieces I've seen that I feel just, they're slippery. They evade all of that. And those are the ones that I remember, the ones that I look at. I'm just like, how do you even get there in your head? I've definitely seen amazing piece of artwork that just completely stumped me. I really have no position that any of this is certain or can be completely understood. There's things that generally tend to work, but no, art is a mystery.
So maybe, because my mind's always trying to find conclusions and solutions, or at least some kind of closure. And in this case, it seems that the self and the ego want to kind of have some kind of definition or ideal laid out. But it seems like the conclusion we're coming to is relinquishing that is you as an artist.
I think so.
Yeah.
Because I know for me, if there was a real concrete answer,
it's boring.
I'm not sure I'd want to keep going. Like, the excitement is how much is possible.
Yeah.
I find that very exciting.
There was a really good, Three Body Problem, the author. I'm not even going to bother trying to butcher that name.
I can't.
He has short stories, and it's in a collection called To Hold Up the Sky. And one of them is about poetry, right? And so, spoiler warning, you've been warned. There's like these, alien races, super advanced civilizations who have condensed universes into whatever. And there was this one race that controlled the galaxy, okay, and another race that was subservient to them. And so the subservient race would go to different solar systems and try to find something interesting to bring back to the master race. To be like, look, cool, huh? Right? And so naturally, they centered the story around humans. So the subservient race found Earth. But basically, they took a poet. They just yanked this dude, and he was like, okay, well, maybe the master will like this creature, this human thing. And fast forward, he brings it to the master. The master scoffs, like, ugh, no, this is why'd you bring me this bug, this insect? Just kill it, just destroy it. And as he was being dragged away, a piece of paper flew out from his garment and had poetry on it. And then the master race creature guy thing was like, oh, hold on a second. And it read, it's like, you were capable of writing these things. And the human was like, yes, in fact, what humans can do is genuine creativity. And you can't do this. You can't pull off the best poems like, and he listed off names of like all these master poets from China. And the master race guy said, scoffed and said, oh, of course I can. And what the master race did said, okay, give me a piece of your hair. I'm going to become one of you and write the best poem. So he took a piece of DNA and then he embodied one of the greatest poets from Earth. He suddenly became philosophical, all this stuff, but he wasn't writing poems. He was just waiting to figure it out. He was like, I got it. The way I'll write the best poem is write every single possible poem ever and say that, yeah, I already wrote the best possible poem. In fact, I wrote a program and it's in there somewhere. At the end, obviously, you can fast forward and he realizes, oh, wait, I can't even find it, but I know it's in there. So I have been defeated, right? And so like it was this cool idea that even if you make every single possible best piece of art with some kind of program, it's still missing the human element where there's the idiosyncrasy. So like you can write a program probably 10 years from now to make a painting that looks like Rourangia did it.
Oh, yeah. Now we're in the AI discussion.
Right.
That's another thing. Very interesting.
Or that Craig Mullins did it. You just give it some lead input or something.
Yeah.
And it comes out with that painting. It's like, oh, is art dead now? No, I don't think so. Because even if the computer can make every possible amazing thing, the human spirit and creativity still has its idiosyncrasy.
Yeah.
Right. And that is art.
Yeah.
Not the ability to generate it all, but the ability to just be you.
Even if there was an AI computer that like you put it in a room with me and everyone was like, all right, go make the best painting you can. And there was like a wall between us and I did the best painting that I could. And then the curtain was pulled back and the computer did the exact same painting, right? One for one. It's utterly the same. And when showed to an audience, there was no difference and it had the same emotional impact. Even if all of that was taken away, an AI can't replace the joy of your subjective experience. Exactly. So that's as deep as you allow it to be. If you experience your work as sort of profoundly joyful, you have salvaged a profound joy from the ravages of just adventitious chance and technology, just the way things develop. And that's always going to be worth something, I think, probably. Yeah. We could probably have a very long discussion about AI.
Right, we're going to be out of jobs. Yeah. All right, go ahead. Sorry.
Probably, but I actually don't think that's a big thing to worry about in the long run. Yeah. All right. I think we could probably wrap this here. I could use some water.
Thanks for letting me join on this discussion.
No, please. The pleasure is all mine. All right.
Good sir. All right. Thanks for watching. Bye, everyone.
You got anything you want to tell people about? You want to plug your YouTube channel? I'm sure a lot of people who watch my stuff have never seen. I'm sure the overlap is complete. Pretty sure everybody who watches me watches you.
Yeah. If you want to follow me, it's just look up Ahmed Aldoori. But I am working on a course for digital painting.
Yes.
Inventive digital portraits, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So keep your eye out for that. I want to teach this stuff. It'll be good.
Yeah, that will be an amazing course when it's out. So I encourage everyone to keep an eye. I've spent a lot of time looking over Med's shoulders over the years, and it's highly educational. Oh. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. You got the mouse, so you want to hit.
You could just not.
All right, we could just leave it on.
All right. Bye, everyone.